Yeah, so as I mentioned in the Carrie and Firestarter video, obviously we're not done with Stephen King yet. We very well may never be done with Stephen King, but I'm kind of okay with that. So here, of course, we have two lead characters who have the same gift, which is being able to see the future, and they are hoping to eventually use this for good, despite the fact that it could also be seen as a curse, given that it's not only do they see horrific things at times, but they're also kind of made an outcast by the people around them because of this, and particularly the skeptical people that may or may not believe that they're actually doing what they're doing, especially when murders start happening in both stories, where it can seem a little suspicious if somebody would just happen to know exactly where something bad is going to take place and what potentially happened. But struggling to see faces or who exactly is doing what, and they may be treated as sideshows while they're at it also, and sort of almost degraded in a sense by these people that may or may not believe what they can do. And what's interesting about that is that does put both of these movies, as outlandish as they may seem, in their own like believable worlds. And obviously, we have two lead characters here that are gonna make this believable. Also, with Annie and the Gift, and then Johnny in the Dead Zone. And I do just want to say up front that talking about the Dead Zone, I feel like is going to be kind of tricky, especially since the whole point is to talk about it with the Gift. But I'm kind of afraid to talk about the Dead Zone because I'm afraid it'll turn more into it's so different from the book, or it's so much is taken out of it, given what was in the book, that I wouldn't want the entire conversation to turn completely into that. But the Dead Zone especially is hard to not bring that up because it almost affects the movie in this way where there's like so much in the book and there's like so much that's built up and there's so many characters that have so much more going on that when you watch the movie, it feels so incredibly bare bones by comparison. So I don't want to dwell on that too much, but that's inevitably gonna come up. But like as far as feeling like a complete story and the whole thing of, because I saw the Dead Zone a very long time ago before I read the book, and I want to try to remember more that how I saw it back then without the knowledge of the book and if it felt as bare bones as it does now. Having read the book not completely recently, but recently enough. So looking at the filmmakers, I think is a good start here, where we have the very interesting combination of Cronenberg and King with the Dead Zone. I know Cronenberg and King sounds like an alcoholic beverage or something, but here, what's interesting about that is Cronenberg already kind of had a bit of a reputation at the time for the kind of movies that he did, and this is even pre The Fly. We're talking like The Brood and Rabbit and stuff like that, and putting that together with King, you would think would make a pretty gruesome story or something, or collaboration. But it's interesting that it happens to be this story, where there's really not much of that sort. Like, there's obviously, murders in it, but it's something that focuses a lot more on, like, kind of the human element that's going on. Where the only thing that's really particularly gruesome is the suicide of Dodd, which, if you want to give credit, if I remember correctly, Dodd's suicide was not near as dramatic as it is in the movie as it was in the. I think in the book he just like cut his own throat or something, which is terrible, but seems mild compared to the self-impalement that the movie went for. But apart from that, it's definitely something that doesn't focus on the things that you would think a Cronenberg King collaboration would have, especially at this time in the early 80s, 83, I think. And then over here we have Raimi, who is obviously known for stuff like, the Evil Dead movies, and later, stuff like Drag Me to Hell, when we're looking at this kind of thing, obviously the Spider-Man movies, but when you're looking at a movie like this, it's almost that combination of the playfulness that we've seen Raimi have, but the fact that he can also be very serious and very character-driven with stuff like A Simple Plan. And there are cases where, and it might seem like, The Gift is significantly more grounded than something like Evil Dead, but like I said, you can still see Raimi's playfulness in it, and from the get-go, really. There's that opening scene where we're just kind of getting, a layout of the land here, and then the camera's, like, panning down a tree, and in mid-pan down, he inserts a jump scare, like, at the very beginning. And it's that kind of thing. You can kind of see Raimi's fingerprints on it. Even if it's telling a story that's quite serious, you can see those Raimi touches in there, and they can be fun to spot. Like, it almost becomes a game to spot them when you know it's a Raimi movie. And everything down to, Cate Blanchett's car being the car that's in every Raimi movie. And also the fact we're talking about writer-director collaborations, where with King and Cronenberg here, Raimi's one of his collaborators as far as the writing process is Billy Bob Thornton. The other writer being his writing partner Tom Epperson, who he did At Close Range with. Not At Close Range. One False Move. I'm always confusing those titles. Walken is probably getting into my head as well. What's interesting is I'm pretty sure this was written pre-Sling Blade. But you can definitely see some of the touches that Thornton would have as far as, like, when we talked about Sling Blade, about how it's always those, side characters that really stick out. Even if they're, like, just in the background for, like, a minute, they can somehow find their way into this whole... The way they fit into this whole community can really stick out and make everything feel pretty real, despite how outlandish the story may be, given that the focus is a psychic. But there was also the whole thing where, there's been plenty of interviews where you can hear Billy Bob Thornton talk about his own mother, who supposedly had, like, psychic abilities, and that's where this story kind of stemmed from to begin with. Yeah, so that's pretty much our starting points as far as these go. I guess we can delve into the Dead Zone and kind of come back to The Gift, where, like, I guess if you want to talk about the lead characters, like I was saying, something they definitely have in common is the idea of, despite being outcast and basically against the odds that people will believe them, they do the best they can to turn this power that they have into something good and do something sort of something that's higher than the sort of dead place that their lives are at, where we have Johnny, who's been in a coma for 5 years after a car accident, and Annie, who has recently lost her husband in this accident. And obviously both these things bring up some really cruel questions, like the whole thing of, like, how much did Johnny lose? And with Blanchett, it's much more in regards to her power, like when she's being interrogated by Michael Jader, and he asks, like, why weren't you able to see that your husband was going to die and stuff like that. Like I said, both these characters, despite the fact that they only seem to seek good, and in Johnny's case also seeking love at least, are just so, like, repulsively treated. It can be, like, genuinely heartbreaking with them, especially the way both movies kind of go for the human element, despite the fact that they've got the other elements that I don't... It's hard to call The Dead Zone a horror movie, because it's definitely got more of, like, almost a sci-fi element to it and a thriller element to it. But with just having King's name plastered on it, it'd be easy to dismiss it as horror if that's the way you feel about the genre. And The Gift is kind of the same way, where it's hard to call it a horror movie, but it's easily got horror elements in it, not just, like, the jump scares, but the way that some of these scenes come about, like when she starts seeing the visions of Katie Holmes, like the whole, when she's, like, all ghostly looking in the tree has always been a really creepy shot to me. And all these very sort of visceral flashes and these like seeming, it's almost like fever dreams coming to her. The dude with the fiddle, I don't remember what his purpose is, if he had one at all. But it's one of those cases where it feels very nightmarish, and the way Raimi was able to capture that feeling really comes through in this sort of low-key terrifying way. But going as far as like where Johnny's starting point was, because unlike Annie, we actually see Johnny prior to his power, and yeah, he was just a very average teacher. And the thing about Walken here especially is like, with Blanchett you can pretty much expect, you know, literally anything. Like very few actresses have the range that she does, or actors for that matter. And where she's got, like, you know, that sort of maternal way about her, but she also has that distance from the kids. And this is stuff that has nothing to do with the power. This is just her being a regular single mom that's just been through a tragedy and has, what, 3 kids to tend to. And the fact that, you know, she doesn't ask for money. And, like, just everything seems to be coming from this good but tragic place. Despite the fact that, you know, even we as, you know, people in the audience can see it as, yeah, if a character like Annie existed in real life, I too would probably dismiss her as just like some sort of con artist or something. And like those donations that she accepts might sound suspicious to somebody, not just, you know, an audience that doesn't know better, but the characters within, like Michael Jeter's character and the like. But when we start off with Johnny, he seems to have a pretty decent life. The little bit that we get of it in the movie, that we get a lot more of in the book. But he's, like I said, he's just an average teacher, but he's also teaching The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, which is quite funny when we know a part that Walken would later play in his career in the 1999 area. But what's interesting about Walken especially is that while Walken has played a number of different characters and shown a different array of emotions, there's still something about him to where, if you were to first think about him in a part like this, you might think there was a sort of coldness that he might have trouble getting past. But he surprisingly plays the average dude and the average teacher relatively well. Like, there is a certain warmth to him, especially when he's with Sarah in these early scenes, and we see that they've got, like, the young love thing going on. But then it's very quick to show that he's obviously had the past trauma of a previous accident that gives him these blistering headaches, and how that is going to eventually come into play, where something is about to be opened up in this car wreck that's going to result in a 5-year coma before we get the sense that he has a new sort of power that he had a little bit before, but now is like overwhelmingly powerful and vivid. And the changes we have to see the character go through, because that's the thing this movie does well and this story does well, is how much it focuses on the fact that the main character has been in a coma for so long and so much has changed while he was out. And how a lot of the focus is going to have to be put on that before we really get into the details of the story as it is. Where we do get stuff early, like when he sees, you know, the burning house and saves the child. But we also have to deal with stuff like his faith being tested, or not even so much that, but like the fact that there's not a whole lot of faith there to begin with, but he's got his mother who's like really sort of overdoing that. Which could, you know, drive people even further away from that if it's aggressive enough. But as far as aggressive goes, there's also the news, which is one of those cases where you can just imagine, once again, if this were a real-life scenario, which is kind of the magic of these movies, where you can constantly, you know, imagine these people with these powers in the real world, which is the real strength of them. So it hits especially hard when we get scenes like when we see him being interviewed and talked to by the press, but a lot of the time it feels more like an interrogation, and like they're just trying to get something out of him, to whether, like, if it happens to be true, all they're going to want to do is use him, and if it happens to not be true, all they're going to want to do is, you know, plaster him as a fake everywhere and basically ruin his reputation entirely. There's even a point in time in the book where he meets Richard Dees, who we got to know better in The Night Flyer, and we know what kind of reporter he is. So to see him deal with this, it's like it's easy to imagine this setup in like a relatively real world. Unfortunate, like it's unfortunate that it's the cruelty that he sees and Annie sees that makes you feel the realness of it. Because there's a whole slew of characters in The Gift. Like, The Gift is basically an ensemble compared to The Dead Zone, which is more of Johnny's story than anybody else's, as far as the movie goes, with other parts being significantly cut down. But we get an interesting look at, like, not necessarily the beginnings of this, necessarily, the power itself, but the scene with Rosemary Harris, where it's Annie's grandmother that kind of comes out. And at first it looks like a normal exchange, but we also kind of immediately get the idea that there's something spiritual about this. And we get the sense of where, at least as far as her and the generation before her, where the power came from, but there's still that mystery of, there's no like real explanation as far as I remember, which is nice. But this interaction with Rosemary Harris is so interesting, and the way Raimi portrays it, because there is definitely a warmth there and like a comfort with, like the comfort of a grandmother, but knowing that grandmother actually is no longer on the earth. So there's like this, the way it's shot and done, especially with the idea of this storm coming, where it's more of a warning, but there's still some, like, even the warmth of this grandmother, there's still something really eerie feeling about it. So that's a scene I've kind of always loved, the way they pulled that off. But, yeah, as far as the ensemble and how other people react to her and her abilities, where we do have Hilary Swank, who is the abused wife. And this is one of those cases where it's kind of a story in itself. Like, there's, both these stories and movies have, like, precursor scenarios that kind of lead in to what the big picture is, where, we're in The Dead Zone, we're dealing with a twisted enough antagonist that the fact that there's a serial killer in town is just the precursor to what Johnny's going to be able to do with his power, hopefully. And here we have the abused wife subplot with Keanu Reeves playing Donnie, the abusive husband. In a very scarily accurate way. Like, there's this whole thing on the internet now where Keanu Reeves is like the nicest dude of all time, and there's all these, him doing all these wholesome things and everything, and interactions with people and stuff like that, and how approachable he is. But and people have, questioned his acting abilities in the past, but he really brings a real quality to this, that he's, like, kind of genuinely scary. Like, he's one of those cases where whenever he's on screen, it kind of makes you nervous, and he's genuinely threatening, and doesn't even care who he's threatening. It could be a child. At one point, it is a child, and just out in the open, in broad daylight, because he just doesn't care that much. Like, everything that looks like he would kill somebody. You may see it as, like, maybe overdoing it as far as setting him up to look like the killer when he's just a red herring. But it's a very, like, we were talking about Bill L. Thornton being the co-writer, and we've talked about how scary Doyle was in Sling Blade because of how real it felt and how nervous he made you, and how you can imagine a guy like that. You've probably met a guy like that, that just kind of terrified you. And that's what Keanu Reeves is bringing here also. Not quite as effectively as Dwight Yoakam did, but there's definitely a scare factor to him. Even when he's like, like his hair's slicked back and he's in the suit in court and he's trying to be as normal as possible, you still get this sense that there is a boiling, scary person underneath. And that's kind of a big key to this movie working also, that being like a credible threat throughout. But we also have Giovanni Ribisi, who is... He's obviously the performance here that I could see being criticized for being a bit much, because Giovanni Ribisi can really go for it if he feels the role is asking for it. But the way he's able to go back and forth here between, like, the relationship he has with Annie, and there's obviously something there where like there's a certain comfort in each other, and he's kind of like a protector. But he can also go into erratic and unpredictable just instantly because of his whole horrifying background and that whole subplot with his dad that goes in really dark directions. But the way he's able to go back and forth with that is really impressive. Like I said, I can see people criticizing it as maybe a bit much. I think after Thornton had like submitted the script and it was going into production, he was asked to play the part, and I could see it being much more downplayed if he had done it. But that, like I said, that sort of erratic unpredictability is a good thing that kind of has you on edge throughout the movie with the way Ribisi does it, even if it's a bit much at times. And once again, though, that's another case where people like him in a real life could be just, if anything, it could be a toned down version. So everybody here seems to be coming from a very real place. Even Katie Holmes, who's basically here just to kind of be the victim, has this way about her where you can get this sense that you get the sense right away meeting her that something's probably not right, and she's got some sort of like darkness to her in some way. That's almost heartlessness to her. That's only going to be more revealed as it goes on, despite the fact that she's dead for most of the movie. But the filmmaking like really comes through on that. Now, as far as like what's driving the characters, where we kind of talked about just kind of the general goodness to Annie's character and how she's basically, like I said, really it just seems like it's giving the characters purpose more than anything else. But another thing that's like really driving Johnny, that's a big part of his story, is this lost love in Sarah. And this is another case where it does feel like it kind of falls short as far as what the book offered. Where it feels like a lot of like Sarah's dilemma is missing. Like we spend a lot of time, like we don't see much of any of Johnny actually in the coma in the movie, when it's a whole chunk of the book, and we get to see how everybody in his life was dealing with it. And Sarah especially, where she had to decide when she was going to move on, and you know, if once she settled down and had a kid, was there going to be a guilt inside her, or was there going to be a longing for him, still a longing for him? And then the whole idea of what if he wakes up, which obviously he ultimately does. A lot of that doesn't seem here. Sarah feels like a very, very minor character in this, despite being the crucial piece in Johnny's story. Like to the point that when they have that where they have that afternoon together, where she brings the kid over, and that, you know, one thing leads to another, it doesn't feel all that like earned. Like you don't get the sense of like the deep love they're supposed to have. If anything, in the movie she comes off more like just a representation in general of the loss that Johnny has had throughout, and the things that he's lost in this gap of being in the coma. But yeah, it does feel like there's a lot of stuff missing. There's a whole thing going on where she gets really close with Johnny's dad. That's not really present here much at all. But it does bring the emotion that's necessary, as far as like when she comes to the door with her husband and Johnny meets him for the first time, and then there's that moment where he just sort of breaks down in front of the kid and just like lets, like, completely and totally shameless, but in a good way, where he just finally lets that emotion out, where it almost feels like it's something that's has meant to be let out in the last 5 years that he's lost entirely. So that's a really strong scene that comes from her. But like I said, I think if the movie feels like she's just more of a representation of something than just a character in herself, and it can be hard to like see that there's like a mutual thing here. But yeah, if you know the story well enough, then you know it's in there. But yeah, and going more, we were talking about some of the ensemble in The Gift. There's also some characters that do come in and out of the dead zone. As far as, like, obviously Stilson is kind of looming. Stilson's a character that we get, like, a whole background on in the book, but the movie saves him for, like, the second half, and, like, he's built up a little bit. His name is dropped a couple of times, and then we see, like, his signs and his billboards and shit, him and his fucking hard hat. And then he's kind of slowly revealed to us and laid out. Where we do get a scene where he meets Johnny in passing, and we just immediately get like the way he just sort of shoves a badge into his hand. Just kind of, and the fact that he's, talking like a politician, gets like just immediately sets up everything you need to know about his character. But that's the funny thing is, like, if you've ever even watched a real politician, you just see Martin Sheen, you're like, I know that guy. I know that fucking guy. And but there's also there's characters that have kind of been switched up here, where in the book we have the Chatsworths, which were this family that he got really close to, that he was tutoring. And they've been replaced here by the Stewarts, I believe their name is. And there is still that closeness here. Like I said, we get the scene where he breaks down. But there is still something that feels like it's not like this. The stuff with the Chatsworths in the book is really good. And it feels like it's really opening up the characters especially. And there is still something here where it's like to see Johnny kind of falling back into a potential life that has nothing to do with his power until it does. Where we kind of see like a sort of normalcy coming back to him. And it's these really great scenes and really great character work. Which adds perfectly into the suspense as it's revealed eventually, inevitably really, that he's going to see something that's going to suggest that this kid is in danger and the problems that are going to arise from that, and basically shatter this one attempt at a normal life he was going to have. The one way that was maybe going to finally get him to bounce back from Sarah just kind of shatters in an instant, along with that ice that the kid almost does fall through in the vision. So stuff like that is really working as far as like there being more characters in it and how they impact Johnny and how they kind of shape his whole journey here and trying to get back into something. But eventually, because of Stilson, we're going to get into some pretty dark territory. As we were saying, it's just sort of like it's you can tell how bad Stilson's going to be when a whole serial killer subplot is just the precursor to this. I remember being a little confused reading the book because we meet Stilson so early and we get the sense of the character he is, where he kicks a dog to death in his first scene when he's younger. I remember being confused when I read the book at first because it felt like they were setting up that Stilson was also the serial killer, which would have been wild. But but even so, the stuff that we're getting to is like bigger than we could have potentially imagined with a character like this, and how Johnny's really finally getting that big purpose in life that may ultimately lead to tragedy. Sort of the same way Katie Holmes' murder comes into play, as far as Cate Blanchett knowing what happened and where it happened, but not knowing who did it. And it basically becoming a whole murder mystery, and eventually a sort of a courtroom drama, and a kind of an interesting turn. But they also play up bringing in characters and kind of giving off suspicions and like so many red herrings. I do think one thing they kind of dropped the ball on was the reveal that Gary Cole is the prosecutor. Where it's, because we get that whole scene at the beginning when he's clearly banging Katie Holmes in secret. And it's like real sleazy and stuff like that. And then when she goes into the office and he's just kind of there, it feels like, I feel like we could have had one more scene where she mentioned she was going, not only did she mention that she was going to the prosecutor's office, but her kind of going there. So it's like there is some sort of build up to like, because you as an audience might think like, I wonder who's playing the prosecutor, who could that be? And then it's like a reveal that it's Gary Cole, who we've met before and we know his place in this story. But it's just sort of anticlimactically shown. And it's like almost like it takes us a second to be like, oh yeah, we saw him before in this, didn't we? Yeah, he was in that one scene. Oh yeah, that's a crucial piece of information. But it's just so sort of offhand revealed practically. I feel like they could have, not in like some big melodramatic way, but built it up like it's like the big deal that it is, at least in a low-key way. But yeah, but they do, like, the way they set up the whole feel of it, though, where, like, everything is constantly sort of looming around everything. I love the shots of the trees. Like, it might seem like there's too many shots of trees in this, like, they're pretty much every transition shot. But it also feels like the trees are kind of like a gauge for, like, where we are on the, intensity. And, like, how, like, is this scene gonna go really dark and really south, or is it just gonna be, you know, sunny and bright or something, or normal? But I don't know what you consider normal amongst these characters, but yeah. But as far as these characters eventually reaching their purpose, we do get this whole thing with Stilson and this build-up, this very, very suspenseful build-up to Johnny realizing he has to do something, because if Stilson gets into full power, terrible, terrible things will happen. And it's, like I said, to the point to where it almost seems outlandish, yet it's weirdly believable in a way. So the only way to do this, of course, is an assassination attempt. Ultimately, potentially sacrificing his own life to do so. But once again, when this is like, when that last shred of hope for a different life and a regular life is shattered, what better way than to do some sort of service and give yourself some purpose on your way out, and end your own suffering and potentially literally save the world practically. And of course, the idea of finding out who killed Katie Holmes exactly. There's something interesting about The Gift that might sound like, you know, a bad thing, but it's not really. The Gift is a movie that I've always liked. But what's interesting about it is I've always found, and I don't think this is the case for everybody, but just sometimes those movies come along and you just kind of get them. So it's, when I first saw this movie, I had rented it. And it didn't have this case. It had that one that's like, you know, got like the brownish sort of tint to it, but it still has all of the characters' faces on it like it does here. And before I even started the movie, this would have been when I was like maybe 13 or something, or maybe 12 or something. I'm looking at the DVD cover and I'm just looking at the faces, and I figured it out before I had even turned the movie on. Like, I was just sort of playing around. I was looking at the faces, and I saw, well, Keanu Reeves looks pretty intense, so he's probably a red herring. Giovanni Ribisi looks pretty intense, he's probably a red herring. The most innocent-looking person seems to be Greg Kinnear, so I'm going to assume that it's him. That was before I turned the movie on. Yeah, but interestingly enough, that didn't really take away from it. Like, it was one of those cases where sometimes... like, there are times where a movie being predictable can be infuriating, because if especially plays up like it's super smart when it really isn't, or super clever when it really isn't. But there's other cases where that can be satisfying for an audience, to be able to figure it out. And when it comes around, it's not just, well, that's bad because I saw it coming. It's, like, it unraveled gradually enough to where it's like, you're happy that it came to the conclusion that you thought it was. Like, it's almost a little victory for you. And that can almost leave you with a positive feeling to the movie also. So that's the kind of thing where I could see myself holding it against another movie, but I feel like this one sets itself up well enough and sets the characters up well enough that I didn't mind that I was literally able to predict the movie by just looking at the DVD cover. But it's, yeah, there's still some people that aren't even on there, like Gary Cole, that could totally have thrown a wrench into that. But yeah, I mean, it does seem obvious as you watch it, but it's, like I said, I don't really have much of a problem with that. And then they throw in that extra little twist also, which also feels relatively easy to see coming, especially because we had the Rosemary Harris scene prior that seems like it kind of set it up a little bit. The idea that she had this vision of Buddy that ultimately came and protected her again, much like he did in real life, and kind of threw a wrench in her sort of visions also, as far as who looked guilty at the time. But then we have that great reveal where she goes to the police station and J.K. Simmons tells her that he, died earlier that evening. And I think it's the way they linger on him also when he helps her up, where he just looks particularly ghostly, and it's like it feels so obvious the direction this is going. But I still kind of like that because I love the fact that when J.K. Simmons says what happened, it does kind of it takes this story that had this sort of supernatural quality to it, and literally turns it into like the ending of a ghost story, which is really appealing, especially when you're looking for this kind of thing, especially around this time of year. Um, so even if all of it seems quite obvious, I still find the movie quite satisfying. Interestingly enough, and I feel like that's the sign that something is working really well and something is really well written. Um, and that's not to say that the Dead Zone doesn't have a perfect ending, because it does. This whole thing of like having a greater purpose, but also you want like the satisfaction of Stilson going down, even when you don't have all the information that the book gives you. Like, just movie Stilson is still enough for you to want to see this person go down. Because Sheen plays that sort of politician character so well, eerily well. And then this whole idea of him using the child as the shield. Like, a lot of people give King flack for his endings, but he really fucking nailed the Dead Zone's ending. Where Johnny does eventually sacrifice his life, but it's like the fact that we know the direction this is going, and the idea of he could have just, killed Stilson, but the way the events, the choices that Stilson makes are the ones that change everything, is really satisfying. Like, he could not have gone out in a worse way. And that's incredibly satisfying. So, as far as these two movies and having a preference, I said that's really hard to say, because having all the information that's in the book makes the movie for the Dead Zone feel very much like a lot of it is missing, and like some of it isn't as thorough as it could be, as far as like the characters and where everything's sort of coming from. But yeah, like I said, I think The Gift, despite the kind of movie it is, The Gift is the kind of movie that could have easily failed. With its setup and the melodramatic characters and stuff like that, but that it does what it does as successfully as it does, really does leave an impact for a movie that just kind of seems like it would be sort of a come and go kind of thing that you wouldn't think about much afterwards. But I think there's definitely something to that and something memorable to it. But I mean, the Dead Zone in general is hard to dismiss, particularly because of the strength of King's story, which obviously does come through in the movie, even if a lot of it's missing. The strength is still there, so it's hard to say. I might, I don't know. I usually when I get stuck on this, the thing I fall back on is which one am I most likely to like rewatch the soonest. That might very well be The Gift. But like I said, it feels like it does a disservice to just the story of the Dead Zone in general, to not praise the movie as much as you can, for what's here. But like I said, it does feel very sort of bare bones when you know the full story, but that's pretty much where we land with that. So obviously there is the series with Anthony Michael Hall, which I've never watched, but I don't know how that would go. The series adaptations of like literary works are usually something that I don't think ends up working out very much. If it's a mini series, that'd be one thing, but like a series, they usually fuck up at some point. So I'm not worried about it. So I think I'm just gonna go ahead and leave this at this. And we have more stuff. The next verses, we'll be talking about Del Toro a little bit. And we'll be talking about like Scenes from a Marriage and the new movies with Halloween Kills and The Last Duel, another trilogy, a whole bunch of stuff, kind of all at once here. So until whatever the next thing is, I think that's it.